Yeah, so welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris T Armstrong, who is the author of At Any Cost, A Guide to the Transhumanist Wager. The Transhumanist Wager, of course, being Zoltan Istvan's 2013 novel, which deals with the transhumanist revolution and in particular the reaction to it. I was to say, thanks very much for your time. We're very grateful.
Sure. Thank you.
The obvious place to start is, how did you first get interested in transhumanism?
Well, when I was young, I was already getting into science. And before I was about 10 years old, if you asked me, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say a scientist, even though I probably wasn't that sure what that was. But my parents got me all these science books, a subscription to these golden books of knowledge, they were called, and they would come every month or whatever. And I would read those and I'd check out science books in the library and stuff like that. So I was getting into science then, science fiction. Then I got into studying artificial intelligence and computer science and stuff in college. And then by the 90s, I was interested in cyberpunk and really got into that magazine, Mondo 2000. And then I started hearing sometime probably in the early 2000s or somewhere around there, like about this Ray Kurzweil guy, right? And so I started, there's this thing called transhumanism. And I said, and once I heard about it, I said, that sounds like me. So so I got into it, and that's pretty much just sort of stumbled onto it one day and found it was
active within the movement for quite a while then. I mean, if you first found out about it in the early 2000s, have you kind of been active since then, or has it been kind of varying levels of interest?
I was interested, and I was reading about and learning about it, but I didn't really do anything that you could call active or publicly active or anything, just posting little weird things on Facebook and stuff like that. But I was just learning about it for a while. And then by 2013, when Zoltan's book came out, then I started getting more into it, and I read that book and really liked it. And then I started a little before that, I was already writing some articles that were getting posted online on certain websites that were transhumanist oriented. But when his book came out, then I started writing a lot about that book and the ideas that were in it. And so from 2013 on, then I got more active and posted more things on my blog and on different websites. So that's about it, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it's a really interesting book, quite a controversial book as well. I mean, both kind of within and without the transhumanist community.
Yes.
One thing I find fascinating about it is that there's something that kind of a lot of transhumanists, to my mind, or certainly some transhumanists, seem to sort of avoid, which is what the reaction to transhumanism is likely to be. And obviously, this is something that Zoltan deals with very heavily. There are going to be some people who are very uncomfortable.
Oh, sure.
I mean, obviously, he concentrates on religious fundamentalists, and that's possibly the most obvious one. But I kind of see a whole plethora of reasons why various people might not like artificially augmenting human capabilities.
Yes.
I mean, was that something that appealed to you? Was that something you felt was kind of a bit lacking within the community?
Yeah, so with me in particular, and some other transhumanists I know, we tend to be very optimistic and look at things, best case scenario, and we figure if there are some issues and problems, my philosophy is, technology can solve problems, including previous problems that were caused by technology. so a lot of us tend to be optimistic, so we don't dwell on that stuff, right? And I've said that I would not be a good person to put on a committee to have foresight about all the dangers of transhumanism and all that. So you got to find one of these more pessimistic people that automatically go to the negative side. I mean, I run into these people all the time. I mean, the minute you mention anything, they go, what about these powerful people that are going to enslave us? And that's the first thing they think of. And the first thing I think of is all the cool things you can do with it. And I'm actually writing a book now. My next book is a science fiction book, transhumanism related, and it addresses this thing. I'll just give a little hint what it is. It's really the order that things need to happen that will help to lessen these fears. If certain things can be made to happen in the right order, then it works out great in my story. We'll see if it actually can work in the real world.
I think it's very interesting in terms of kind of like the public perception. So obviously,
Yeah.
you ask most people about transhumanism, and got what you're talking about. But I think it's started to get more and more attention, especially in political circles. Like people might vaguely know what you're talking about. And also, the transhumanist movement's becoming a lot more engaged in politics. So the 2016 presidential bid was probably the key moment. But there's transhumanist parties popping up all over the world.
Yeah.
And as the transhumanist movement becomes more engaged in politics, you find kind of other politically active people become more interested in transhumanism and have both a kind of hostile and a positive response depending on their philosophy. So is this something that you see kind of growing going forward, the tension between transhumanism, which is kind of outlined in this book, and its opponents becoming one of the key political issues perhaps of the 21st century?
Yeah, I mention this a little bit in my book, but I don't go into it too deeply. But I just think the time will come. Right now, when I was comparing like how extreme it is in Zoltan's book versus real world opposition, I mean, it's like nothing compared. I mean, because and I think it's possibly only because there haven't been a certain level of successes in transhuman technology and people actually experiencing it, and a lot of people upgrading themselves in some strange way. I think once that happens, it'll get much worse. People that are just fundamentally, viscerally turned off by the idea of anything artificial or because lots of people, when they think of, if they think of some extreme future thing where we can upload our consciousness into some other thing other than a human body, if they can accept that idea. But that to them, they tend to think of technology or as a computer as like their laptop or a toaster or some metallic unhuman thing and all that. But if we did something silly like that, put ourselves into something that didn't have all this great extra enhanced sensory capabilities and all this, that would be a big fail. We wouldn't want to go backwards and put ourselves into a less capable and sensorially interactive thing. These things that we're thinking about are enhancements. We'd be more capable, and it would solve some problems of biology and things like that. So if people can see it in that way versus, oh, I'm going to get stuck into my laptop or something and be a prisoner in there or something. So it's a perception of what we really mean, I think, and that'll become clearer, I hope, in the future.
Well, that was definitely one of the things I really enjoyed about the book but it actually deals in quite an extreme way, but it deals with potential opposition. I mean, what transhumanists are advocating is by far the most radical revolution in human history. I mean, there's no even very and kind of every previous revolution, so the Industrial Revolution, even the original Agricultural Revolution, obviously did a lot of good, but there were always people that were uncomfortable, and they always sort of trigger some conflict. And I think it's really cool to see the transhumanist movement starting to engage more. Because, I mean, like you said, I kind of think that once some of these technologies actually start moving off the drawing board and into reality, which I'm pretty confident they will, once that happens, I think they'll start being a much more aggressive reaction. One thing that's really interesting about Zoltan's work is his 3 laws of transhumanism. Which I thought was a fascinating part of the book. So I'll read them out very quickly for anyone who hasn't read the book. So it's a transhumanist must safeguard one's own existence above all else. A transhumanist must strive to achieve omnipotence as expediently as possible as long as one's actions do not conflict with the first law. And a transhumanist must safeguard value in the universe so long as one's actions do not conflict with the first and second laws. Well, that's a really interesting philosophy. It's quite individual based. Transhumanism for thinking for the individual and for the community. Is that how you see it, or?
Well, let me just mention one thing, that these are taken from Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, right? Inspired by that. But there's Asimov also later added a zeroth law right before the first one, which applied more to humanity. Like his laws are what robots should not do. It shouldn't harm people, should try to help them if they can, save them and things like that. So that was kind of the first three laws were on an individual level. The zeroth law, he's more applied to humanity, to say if there comes an opportunity to protect humanity, you must do that too. So the robots are always supposed to protect humans and then humanity also in the zeroth law. Yeah, Zoltan's laws are on the individual level because he's got this character, Jethro Knights, who he just gets it into his head one day because of certain experiences he's had, that his prime objective in life going forward has to be to preserve his life. And he is an extremist in that sense, where he says, above all else, or transhumanism will prevail at any cost, which is the name of the book, my book. And also his antagonist, the Reverend Belinus, says the exact same phrase: at any cost, he will fight the transhumanists. Right. So it is a very individualistic thing. And even Zoltan in an interview says something about, someone says, that doesn't seem like a very pro-social or humanity kind of idea. And he goes, well, it's not really. It is. You're right. It's not. This is for one guy who's trying to keep himself alive long enough, to borrow Kurzweil's phrase, to live long enough to be able to live forever, which means get to the point where you can preserve your life in a more stable form than just in a biological form, which can be killed easily. So yes, it is. My long-winded answer is yes, it is very individualistic versus it's not looking towards humanity. It's just one person at a time, solve this issue. And then ultimately, Jethro wants to make this ability available to everyone. It's not just for him, but it's for at minimum it's him, because if he dies, it's game over for him, and who knows what will happen with his ideas. Anyway.
I mean, I was speaking to Aubrey de Grey, probably about this time last year, and he was talking about, I think it's longevity escape velocity, which I thought was a very interesting concept. But you don't actually live forever. You just need to get to the point where you're advancing on average as many years as you age, as an technology. I mean,
yes.
There's kind of the reactions to the book. I say, obviously, there's lots of people love it. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I think it's a really interesting book. I'd thoroughly recommend anyone to read it. I'll put a link in the description, and also to your book, of course. But I know there are some people in the community who think it's a bit extreme, who kind of worry. I mean, I know the kind of Atlas Shrugged metaphor is sometimes used, but it's
right.
sort of associating transhumanism with conflict. I mean, do you think there's any truth to that? Do you think that it's in some ways a bit provocative?
Oh, sure, definitely. Yeah, I view it as a story about extremists, and they're going to do extreme things, and their philosophies are extreme, and so there's extremism all over that book, right? So it's easy to get people riled up about it, So, yeah, it's an extreme version of where it could get in Zoltan's view if certain things happen, certain opposition happens, and and there becomes a leader. I don't know. Can we imagine that a country like the United States could get sort of taken up by some weird leader who might think extreme thoughts? I don't know if that could ever happen. I'm being sarcastic. Yeah. So I think, I completely understand when people are put off by the extremism in the book, but Zoltan says it's a cautionary tale. He hopes it doesn't get to anywhere near that, but he's written a story that where people do get upset about it naturally, plus they're egged on by a leader that really appeals to them as a kind of savior from this scary stuff.
Yeah. One thing the book deals with is transhumanists basically end up having to work outside the current state system because they're being persecuted so much, particularly in the United States. So they kind of form their own alternative society, which obviously eventually gets attacked by. But I mean, is that something that is that an idea that's kind of active in the transhumanist community, that we need to leave the United States, form our own community, form our own country, or is this very kind of drawing board stuff?
I haven't seen that really, and even Jethro in Zoltan's book didn't see it until it reached a certain point. Once it reached this point, he said, okay, America is going too far down this road of kind of actually having a war on transhumanism by law and things like that, and really restricting and cutting back scientific research funding and sort of outlawing transhumanism. That's what pushed them over. Now, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I have heard some transhumanists say, if you push us too far, we will fight you. That's very few, but I've seen some people say that, but we're not to that point. But yeah, I'm sure people would try to search for alternative places if one place became too inhospitable to transhumanism. I just don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
One
thing I found quite interesting. So obviously, the kind of Francis Fukuyama criticism of transhumanism. So I think he called it. Was it back in 2000, so somewhere around? He called it the world's most dangerous ideology.
Yes.
Which I thought was quite interesting because at the time it was so very, very niche. And who was it who wrote back? There was an essay in response accusing him of bioconservatism. That. I don't think it was Ray Kurzweil. I think it was. It's one of the guys who's now at the Oxford Centre for Humanities. Swedish guy.
Bostrom.
Yeah,
Nick Bostrom.
Yeah. And Nick Bostrom did a really interesting response accusing him of kind of bioconservatism.
Sure.
I mean, for me, one of the kind of the fundamentals of transhumanism has been, I find it very hard to see humans as, in any remote way, kind of perfect or finished in their current form. It seems that evolution has obviously given us some very good things, but it's given us some very bad things. I mean, do you find it strange that there are people who just think we have to stick with whatever natural selection gave us, but we can't move beyond that?
Yeah, well, it is strange to me because I have the totally opposite frame of mind, but I can understand it, and I can understand why he used that phrase even back then, before there was much public talk about transhumanism, because he saw the fundamentals that transhumanism, it's right there up front in the name. You want to transcend humanism, and some transhumanists say they don't like that word for that reason, because it's scary, But to people like me, well, okay, let's say someone like me, for example, because I've had many physical issues that have stopped me from doing things like my careers and things. I've had like over 10 surgeries and things like that. So I have a very more acute interest in transcending limitations of biology, because they've held me back in certain ways. And I could use an upgrade in certain things. So it's not, even if people are not religious, it's easy to find people to say, dude, I don't want to live forever. I don't want to live 300 years or anything. Life is hard enough. I'm looking to get a rest pretty soon, even if they're not super religious, they vaguely think, well, maybe I'll have this kind of some existence after I die that's not so hard or something, so I do have sympathy and with people who have that idea. It's just not mine. And because it doesn't take long. Within 5 minutes of talking to a transhumanist or reading about transhumanism, you're going to see, oh, they want to move beyond human. I won't be myself anymore. I won't. All these crazy things start flooding in, and you can't blame them because they're right. That's what humanists want to do. They want to get to another level. So yeah.
Oh, you said you're writing a novel. Can you kind of
Yes.
give me insight into what that's on? Just a kind of like a quick teaser.
Let's see. What can I tease?
What can we get away?
It's really in the beginning stages, so
Sure.
it's all kind of generally fleshed out, a general outline, but it involves a particular scientist, female scientist of Indian background. Both parents are scientists, actually grandparents too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and she's just a super genius, and she's into neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and all this. And it just shows a progression of how it's in the very near future, not super far in the future, maybe a decade, at most 2 decades, but maybe like 10 to 15 years. So there's a certain amount of progress we've made in neuroscience and certain technologies, computer science. And so I'm showing how she's able to, plus she's super smart. I mean, she's like one of the world's most greatest scientific geniuses. So that plus better technology, she's able to start making some things become a reality. And there's going to be pushback. There is pushback, not to the degree in Zoltan's book, but there starts being pushback because she's talking about, oh, now we're taking this stuff out of the lab and out of the realm of theory, and we're starting to apply it. So she's going to get pushback about that. And so it just shows my idea, tying back to what I mentioned earlier about trying to make things happen in the correct order, which is something transhumanist Steve Fuller has mentioned. I've been thinking it for years before I heard him saying it, of writing some articles talking about certain things need to happen because we're really stuck in our, primate, advanced ape kind of psychology of, them against us and my tribe against your tribe, and a scarcity mentality that we grew up for survival issues. These things were valuable, but I think we can sort of try to move beyond those. So it deals with all these kind of issues, but it's just in the beginning phase. I only started it like two months ago. So yeah.
One argument I find it really interesting that you mentioned the tribalism stuff. If that's something that I'm very curious about as well. I mean, there's obviously an argument that I've heard some transhumanists make, which is that obviously we're a very, as you say, we're kind of advanced apes, but we're advanced apes now with nuclear weapons, and in 100 years' time, God knows what we're going to have.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there's an argument that a correction is almost required? Otherwise, humans there's a decent chance of them self-destructing as a species.
Well, yeah, that's why I think it's so important to see some transhumanists, or maybe many or most, tend to think of physical upgrades. Oh, I can get this arm that can make me throw a football, a mile, or run fast, or think faster, or whatever. But I also think there needs to be these psychological upgrades too, that tries to counteract some of these ape tendencies. So yeah, I think if we don't get some of that under control, yeah, just like Einstein had a quote about that when the nuclear, everything's, wait, was it Einstein or Oppenheimer? Anyway, everything's changed except our way of thinking. We've gotten more technology, but we got to get a handle on our psychology and mentality and these things. So that's a top priority for me in my novel and in my thinking generally of transhumanism.
I can't remember who said it, but I thought it was a very good analogy, but someone compared it to giving a hand grenade to a monkey. And at some point, the monkey is going to pull.
Yeah. And the monkey's too stupid to realize you got to hold on to that thing. And as soon as you let go of that, it's going to go, So yeah, geez, monkeys.
I mean, So obviously, we already talked about this. The transhumanist movement has definitely grown a lot in the public consciousness. I mean, I guess kind of back in the early 2000s when Francis Fukuyama was warning that, the most dangerous ideology, it was very niche, very kind of academic.
Yeah.
It feels that it's moved beyond that. But I kind of wonder if it's nearing a breakthrough moment. So I asked Zoltan about this. The comparison I used was with Andrew Yang and UBI. It's an idea which has been floating around
Right.
while slowly gaining prominence, but just hasn't quite broken through to the mainstream. I mean, do you think there will be a point in, I don't know, the next decade, 15 years, say, where transhumanism becomes like a household name, or even if they don't use that word, everyone talking about?
Yeah, I think so. A few years ago, I made a joke that I said, I'll know that transhumanism is starting to get into the mainstream when my spell check understands this word, because it never knew what the hell I was trying to type, So that's just one little jokey side of it. But I think possibly, I'm just improvising here. I haven't really thought deeply about this, but I think possibly the first thing that's going to happen, thanks to guys like Aubrey de Grey, is once we get a significant boost, even a minor breakthrough in stopping aging, or let alone reversing it. But once we can start seeing something like that, and not even make us live like super long, but what transhumanists talk about is a health span. Don't just think about a lifespan. It wouldn't do us any good to live 150 years if we're like in a chair, like messed up. We have to have a 150-year health span so that we're still mentally and physically active longer. So I think that may be the kind of breakthrough because people can see that as a benefit to them. Yeah. They don't see a breakthrough that's like going to replace them or make them less in some way. So I think if we can get some health and lifespan improvements in the near future, in the next 10 years, that people can see a significant change in that direction, that could ease it in a little bit better. People can say, oh, well, this is associated with transhumanism. Maybe transhumanism isn't so bad after all. Look, it made my grandmother, helped her Alzheimer's go away, or whatever the heck it can do. So that's my guess, that medical things may help ease our way into it first.
I mean, it seems like there's obviously a lot of people working on the sort of technologies that transhumanists welcome, and I'd say have kind of a broadly transhumanist mindset, who wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as such. So people like Elon Musk, Neuralink, right down the transhumanist.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm aware, I might be wrong about this, as far as I'm aware, he's never actually described himself as a transhumanist.
Yeah, I haven't heard him.
I mean, do you think there's a reason for this? Why people are sort of slightly scared of being associated publicly with the name? Is the movement just too obscure, or is it seen as being a bit extreme? I'm kind of interested in as why people don't sort of self-define.
Yeah. Probably a little bit of all of those things. One thing I've noticed with certain really, really genius-y type people, and even just really super nerdy type people that are really into technology and certain philosophies, they're very particular about how they use words, and a lot of people I meet who are transhumanist types, they don't have a kind of a joiner mentality too much. They say they're transhumanists, but they don't want to join something that may restrict them or give them, if there's already a negative connotation to transhumanism, why take that on if you don't need to? Elon Musk doesn't need to. He can just keep working on his stuff without declaring himself as something scarier than he already is to people. I mean, there are people that really demonize him, and he doesn't even need to call himself a transhumanist. Yeah. That's the same thing. My character in my book, she says, well, in spirit, someone asks her, are you a transhumanist? And she says, well, in spirit, I agree with all these things. I'm not typically one who I don't want to restrict myself by saying I'm in this tribe and having to, you know, argue or defend a certain position that they might take. And I just, her position is like the Bruce Lee model of I absorb what is useful, I reject what is of no use, and then add what is my own. So that's her philosophy, and that's kind of, that may be a philosophy of some of these people like Aubrey de Grey doesn't, I don't think he calls himself a transhumanist, and Elon and other people that we go, you know, you seem like a transhumanist to me. But yeah, they just don't need the headache of people, oh, you're an evil transhumanist. Yeah. Maybe that's my guess.
Yeah. I mean, obviously at some point, as you were kind of saying, it could be with the first kind of extended aging technology, where this stuff starts to move out, or more online podcasts, well, or videos such as this, and into the mainstream. I mean, as you've been kind of, I presume you kind of interact with quite a lot of normal people who don't really know much about the movement. I mean, is their awareness increasing, and what's their perception? Is it changing? Are they becoming more positive, or?
Yeah, I do try to talk to some quote normal people, you know, like my sister, some friends, and sometimes I'll show them something I'm writing and just see what their reaction is. And some of it's strange. Right away with the fear. That's first thing. Fear of, you're saying weird things. Am I going to be forced into this? All this stuff. So, well, it's just like AI is becoming a big word. It's more common now. People say, "Oh yeah, our app has AI, and this has AI, and we got AI in our toaster now, and whatever." And so that's become a big thing, and that's more common. You know, back when I was getting the AI in the early '80s, late '70s, early '80s, back then it was like, "What the hell's AI?" I mean, and it wasn't much either yet, as far as being in the real world. So I think it's hard for me to gauge, because you do get in a little bit of a bubble and talk to other transhumanists a lot. But at least the word, I mean, I would say, thanks to Zoltan, the word is out there in the public more. I mean, he's constantly posting articles of his and things about his work in other languages too. I mean, he's always saying, oh, here's a French thing, here's a Japanese thing, here's this and that. So that word is getting around. Now, sometimes the other transhumanists who aren't fans of Zoltan are a little annoyed that he's the spokesperson worldwide practically for transhumanism. So they're afraid he's going to tarnish its image, as if you could tarnish it more. So yeah, I just think the word is getting more out there, and at least I think more people are knowing it. So I once said when he was running for president, that I think it will become, we'll know it's got a little more into the mainstream when it's not covered by almost every news agency that talks about him or transhumanism as kind of a man bites dog story. It's like, ooh, look, the whole point of their covering him or transhumanism is, look at this really weird thing. I mean, what the hell is it? It's like a bizarre thing. When it gets to the point where people say, oh yeah, transhumanism, we've heard of them. There's the Transhumanist Party, there's the Green Party, there's the whatever party, all these other parties. It'll be just, yeah, those guys, they got some weird ideas. But when news people stop covering it as like, wait till you hear this bizarre thing, until they just say, oh, here's what the transhumanists are talking about now. Then I think once you see that, plus the spell checker, those two things, then we'll know transhumanism is getting more widely known, at least, if not more widely accepted. Well, that will take longer, if ever. I don't know.
One thing I've somehow, I think some people like to skirt around, but it does sometimes feel there's a bit of a divide within the movement between, I guess, what you call kind of the more libertarian type
Sure.
and the more, I guess, social democratic.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a divide that you think can be fixed, or is it potentially going to be that as this stuff becomes more and more important? Because you know, what was it at the moment? Transhumanists all stick together because it's such a small movement.
Yeah.
But you know, could it be like the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks? Could you have a split off into completely different movements? What's the
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there is that divide. I run into it all the time. They're the more libertarian types. They like James Hughes calls it techno progressive side. And I mean, he's very progressive, very left. I think he just flat out calls himself a socialist. So he has a socialist idea versus the libertarians. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if they're going to, I don't know if they can come to a compromise. I mean, I know, yeah, I know libertarians. I know I used to be a libertarian when I was like in my 20s and 30s probably. So I know how they think and how they are really attached to their principles and don't like compromising those principles because they're fundamental to freedom and etc. So, and then the techno-progressive are equally committed to their principles. So I don't know. Yeah, it would take someone more attuned to political things because I've sort of purposely taken myself out of the political side because I just find it to be a, you know, a hive of scum and villainy. I don't know where that phrase come. It just popped into my head. So yeah, it's just like, oh God, please, politics. I used to be into politics a lot when I was a libertarian, and free market economics and all this stuff. Really into it, and I used to watch those shows. My wife would call my Sunday morning shows the art. Are you going to watch your arguing shows this morning? And so, so I just reached a point sometime, at least 20 or some years, I just said, okay, I'm out of politics. I'm going to let people who can stand this stuff and are interested in it still handle that part. I'm going to think about other things. So I'll be interested too to see if they can bridge that divide or come to a compromise, or maybe just have a couple different flavors that are not too at each other's throat. You know, say, okay, you have this. It's hard to imagine though, because they're so, I won't, yeah, why not? I'll say they're both extremes. You know, they're not, neither one of those sides are kind of a middle of the road kind of live and let live. They have certain ways they want it to happen and they're pushing for it. So I don't know. I don't know. Sorry. That was a long way of getting to, I don't know.
No, it was a good summary. I mean, so obviously you've been kind of around the movement, or at least aware of the movement for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Since the early 2000s. How do you think it's changed? I mean, it feels like it's becoming a lot more involved in practical politics, but kind of beyond that, is it very different to what it was in the early 2000s, or is it quite similar?
Well, I don't remember what we were just talking about. I don't remember that being such a divide and such a conflict back then. Although, you know, it came out of, there were the extropians in the 90s and stuff, Max Moore, and they were, I think they would say they were more libertarian back then. So they were right in the beginning, they were more in that libertarian side of it. But in the earlier days, in the 2000s, I don't remember this being such a topic that came up. Maybe James Hughes wasn't pushing his views as much then yet, even though he was into it way back. You know, he's one of the sort of modern OGs of transhumanism. But yeah, I think that's how it's changed. Maybe it's got more divided in some ways. Possibly, maybe somebody else might have another view of it, but I just don't remember these two sides being at each other as much in the beginning. It was just general transhumanism. maybe I just hadn't become aware of it yet. But that's the biggest difference that I notice.
In terms of kind of like transhumanism getting a kind of public image, I'd say the most important single moment was Zoltan's 2016 campaign, because that just got so much press coverage. I mean, not just the United States, around when I was very aware of it. And obviously that's been great. Do you think that there's more of that to come? Because obviously it's the political engagement that got that interest.
Yeah.
Or do you think it's going to be more kind of practical scientific breakthroughs that actually kind of through this stuff works and therefore get the attention?
Yeah. Well, there's possibly it can carry on from where Zoltan left off. He as he said a few years before he did it, he was going to. This wasn't just the party just to aggrandize himself forever. It was he got it started. Then he turned it over to some people, and there are some very smart people that are in charge of what he passed on to them. So they can possibly keep it moving forward, even though Zoltan is to some people's chagrin the most worldwide visible face of transhumanism. He's always traveling all over the world talking about it, and so I think it can because there are some really thoughtful people working in the transhumanist party movement. So I have hope for those people. It's not just as Zoltan wanted it. He didn't want it to be just a Zoltan thing. He said, I want to get 15 years past it, and people will just say, oh yeah, there's Zoltan who started it, but we've taken it on and progressed everything. He never wanted to be just a one-man show of him. So that's what I'm hoping for.
I mean, just one final question. I always like to end on an optimistic note.
Okay.
So, of kind of obviously transhumanists are interested in so many different technologies. I mean, is there one that excites you in particular? And kind of if so, why?
Yeah, but it's going to be quite a while for that one. I went. My career has gone back and forth between computer science and music. I've been a musician all my life too. So, and it would just depend on the condition of my arms and these physical surgery issues, that whether I would be doing mostly music or mostly computer science and all that. But the thing I'm mostly interested in, because I'm really interested in neuroscience. If I, 20 years ago, actually, I wish when I would have gone, I went back to finish up a couple of music degrees. I got my master's and bachelor's. And so I wish at that time I would have just kept doing music for fun, but I wish I would have gone back. If I was going to go back to school at 40, I wish I would have gone into neuroscience, because that's my biggest interest and where I think the important things can lead. For me, my biggest interest is mind uploading, which is kind of like the one of the farthest off and controversial things that transhumanists can talk about. So that is my interest, and that's features heavily in my new science fiction book. So, I mean, that's pretty much the goal of this book. So that's my biggest thing. And I wrote a 2013, I had a paper, it's on my blog now. It's not on those websites that it was originally on, because they don't have those. One of them doesn't exist. The other one doesn't have those articles anymore. So an article about trying to convince people that if you really do copy every detail that we can figure out to a fine enough resolution, and you make a copy of that, the form and the function of a brain, you really do have you. This is the neuroscientist view of it. I mean, other people will go, well, no, where's me, my soul, or this X factor that humans have? You won't grab that. I think my hypothesis is, yes, you will grab it, including your sense of self and your personality, and everything is there. A neuroscientist's point of view is it's there. Your brain is doing all these things. If you copy the brain, you've copied you. People can't accept the idea. That's what I do in this article called, you could Google it, But Which One Is Me is the beginning of the title of it. If you type that, Chris Armstrong, But Which One Is Me, you'll probably find it on my blog. And it's to put forth the idea of, right now we have a mono-being bias, which means we can only exist in this one location, in this one body, and anything else is merely a copy of me, no matter how good it is. That's not me. And that's perfectly, I feel the same way. I mean, it's deeply ingrained. I live here. I don't live anywhere else. I cannot be anywhere. As in Highlander, there can be only one. All right. So I say we have a mono being bias, and I try to convince people we will have to get used to the idea of poly beings, of there being not just an identical twin, not a clone, not something very, very, very much like you, but is you. Now we will be in a position where you are here, there can be copies of you, and they're all you, at least at that moment when they've all been made. Once they travel off and start having different experiences, there'll be you plus new experiences, so they'll start changing. But I contend that it really is you, and all versions that you make of you will think they're the only ones too, because they're the real ones, because that's our natural thing until you've transcended this mono being bias and can accept poly beings. And so anyway, yeah, so mind uploading is my thing, but I'm going to be 62 like next week or something. Am I going to be around? I may have to go into cryonics or something. Most of these things, I think I was born a little bit too late. I don't have, like some people like Zoltan has said, oh, I'm going to live forever. There are certain transhumanists that talk very confidently like that. I don't have a big confidence that I'm going to make it to some of these bridges that's going to help me live forever, unless I am seriously thinking, that shows how, when you're getting to be an old codger, I'm seriously thinking about cryonics. You know, it's my only hope of, if you can keep this brain around and fix whatever was wrong with it and fix things in the future, then you might be able to put me into another form. Yeah. Other than that, I may just expire before I get to see how this all turns out. And maybe you can see it, because you don't strike me as a 60-year-old, right?
I just aged well. That's sort of...
Yeah, maybe you know something.
No, Chris, it's been a real pleasure. I've loved having you on.
Thank you.
I'll put a link to your book in the description for anyone who wants to kind of check it out, and Zoltan's, because obviously the two kind of go together so well.
Yes.
But yeah, no, say thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's been great.